First of all, Dr. Amir, before we start talking about the general file of the Egyptian Foreign Affairs, now, earlier today there was a ministerial meeting that took place between the ministers of the Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry along with the ministers of Algeria and Tunisia regarding the Libyan crisis. How important and what's the significance, what can be achieved as a result of this ministerial meeting between the three countries, Egypt, Algeria and Tunisia?
Well, it's an accomplishment for the Egyptian diplomacy, which we have worked hard concerning the Libyan file. We had several obstacles many years ago concerning the internal affairs of Libya, who would represent Libya in the outside world. And there was a debate about the personality of Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. Egypt presented him as the person who can guide the Libyan army and could be a spokesman for the Libyan cause in Europe. He was refused at the beginning, but we succeeded in doing that. Then we had the second obstacle, which was Algeria, a country who has a specific kind of mentality in foreign affairs. They have in their constitution, it is said that they would not have any external intervention in other countries' affairs. Well, we never asked for that, but Egypt explains to our friends and brothers in Algeria that there has to be an action against the terrorist groups there. And we have seen many times cross-border attacks. They cross the border as they do with Egypt, from Libya to Algeria. Then we had the third, and this meeting means that Algeria is beginning to take action in this way. The third obstacle was Tunisia, and it was, of course, the government was formed by the Muslim Brotherhood, and at a certain time the Ghannouchi government and all this group refused, of course, to work with Egypt until there was fair elections in Tunisia, and the people made their choices and they refused the Muslim Brotherhood there. And then now there is President Essebsi there. So we had changes on the level and internal level of Algeria, of Libya, then foreign affairs in Algeria, then in Tunisia, how they are dealing with. The country who is paying a heavy price and all that, of course, is Tunisia, because many of the groups cross the border from Libya and they have committed very hard attacks inside Tunisia. So I think that there is an urgency for them to cooperate on this file. There is another significance for this meeting, is that when we see the geopolitical situation now in Syria, things are being dealt with political, let's say, bargaining. They're saying, well, who will leave the Kurds and who will leave the Turks and then who will leave Assad alone, and there is all these changes. That means that there's another file that will be opened soon, which is the Libyan file. It has oil, it has strategic importance. So we have to be organized as Arab and North African countries. That's why this trilateral meeting is very significant, because we don't want to be surprised when the international community and superpowers will say, well, we have to deal now with the Libyan conflict and then we won't have any organized plan. We have to present to the outside world, especially to the European Union, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, the dangerous aspect of terrorism there, that we have to all help the Libyan army lift the embargo which was imposed on Colonel Gaddafi at a certain time, and help the Libyan army, they have the head of it, Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. They could go on the way of democracy and elections whenever they want to do it, but stability should be brought first on the ground. And this is very important, because in Egypt we were severely hit by terrorism from this part But fortunately, we have an excellent army present on the borders. But we have to find a solution.
Yes. Dr. Abdel Halim, now this tripartite meeting, Egypt, Algeria and Tunisia dealing with the Libyan crisis, it's definitely a step forward in the Egyptian diplomacy and for the sake of the Libyan people and Libya as a whole. But as Dr. Amir mentioned, the international community might want to step in sooner rather than later and try and open this Libyan file. Now, how do you see the international community, what would be on their agenda dealing with the Libyan situation? What sort of solutions or ways to deal with the Libyan situation do you imagine they have in mind?
Yeah, right. Perhaps the two most, intriguing countries and parties actually that would have their own ways within the Libyan territories are supposed to be France in the first instance, in addition to Italy in the meantime. And we'd have to consider the fact that at one time Libya had been an Italian colony, and they would have to have their own agenda actually, and the previous adventures, the source of the supreme amount of interest of knowing how rich the country is and how ambiguous their own future would seem to be actually under the circumstances and under the auspices of the sort of the perpetual struggle that did take place actually since quite perhaps 4 or 5 years between Field Marshal Khalifa Qasim Haftar and Faiz al-Sarraj, who is supposed to be actually advancing every now and again just by way of thwarting all the efforts of Khalifa Qasim Haftar. But given the fact that the case as it stands actually, and the straightforward and direct role that is to be very much vehemently and straightforwardly, in addition to the fact that democratically, I would say, played by the existence every now and again of the Egyptian armed forces on the border lines actually, securing both ways without even intriguing a certain individual palate, preparing and planning actually for the sort of bringing them together, and all these tussling groups actually, just by way in the meantime of trying to pacify the sort of the tribal antagonism, I would say, between a large number of tribes that do exist actually on a Libyan territory. This is one of the major fundamental problems actually that I think that the Egyptian diplomacy would have to be quite aware of. In addition to the fact that the more often appearance actually very much vehement and excessive on materialistic ground for both Italy and France, given the fact that as well, that both of each would accuse each other of trying every now and again to open the way for illegal immigrants and the sorts of the extremists and those, Daesh groups actually after their own escapist attitude on the part of Syria as much as Iraq. That's why I would really think that those two so inevitable, very much important materialistic countries, I would say, would have their own ways within the Libyan territory just by way of protracting and prolonging the battleground, the bloodshed and the devastation and the sort of the external as much as the internal disputes that should always be there in the sole interests actually of those foreign countries. But given the fact that we are quite aware of all these agendas and of all these taciturn agreements among all those countries, including the states as well, I would really say that we are marching towards pacifying the source of the tussle that do exist. In much the same way, the sort of the summit that had been held about a week ago under the auspices of the United Arab Emirates, actually, trying to bring together both Khalifa Qasim and Faiz al-Sarraj, and they did agree at the end of the day, actually, on proposing the democratic elections, no matter how it would seem to be the eligible one who would come actually, that should be selected and rejected by the common consensus of opinion of almost all the Libyan figures actually. Yes. And I think that the Egyptian diplomacy actually is very much interested also of sticking much too much actually to the original schematic solution that had been dosed during the course of the 1915, that is El Khairat agreement, that seems to be the final, solution that should be adapted and should be taken into account under the, the protection of the international power as well.
Yes, yes. Well, Dr. Amir, now, since we're talking about the Egyptian foreign policy in general, and talking about this, the Libyan issue, now, if we are talking about the international community and how they would be interested in Libya, if we're talking about countries such as France and Italy, now, last week, Egypt has actually held the first of its kind, the summit between the Arab League and the European Union under the chairmanship of President Sisi and Donald Tusk. Now, do you see that maybe we were trying to forge some sort of a deal, or at least make the Arab League's intention and Egypt's intention regarding the Libyan issue quite known for countries such as Italy and France?
Well, let me, before tackling this question, I would like to say that there is a surprise in the way also coming from Russia. They have their own man for this solution, and no one is waiting for him. It's Saif al-Islam al-Qaddafi. And they wish that he will take the lead. They're very interested in him. So let's not forget that Russia is a strong player, and they have changed all the game in Syria. And I don't think that we will be against Russian mediation in this conflict in Libya. We, as Egyptians, we like to talk to everyone. And we have excellent relations with Washington and Moscow. So this is the remark that I had to say, because this would be the issue in the coming weeks. Concerning France and Italy, well, Italy has a great problem now. It's the populist government which represents the people. This is not a problem, this is a solution. They've found a solution. And a populist government is not interested in anything outside their borders. They have a great deal of problem because of the refugees who came from Syria and mainly from Libya. So what they will be interested in, the Prime Minister of Italy, and also let's not forget the Palermo summit, and President Sisi was invited, and he brought with him also General Khalifa Haftar with him to present it to the Europeans. And this was the first summit with Europeans that Khalifa Haftar was present. So I think that the Italians are more now concerned about their internal affairs in this issue, what they will gain from, how will we settle the refugee problems. Their dream is to extradite refugees back to where they came from. And Italy and France now, they have huge diplomatic problems. France just called its ambassador from Rome a few weeks ago, and they have a huge problem concerning the policies concerning Libya and refugees. So I think that even within the European Union, there is no agreement on how to deal with this precise issue. And President Macron saying in France that he signed the Marrakesh Pact of Immigration in December 10th, 2018, and he thinks that we have to accept all the refugees, but we, it's not only France, it's the EU, and Italy is not thinking that it should follow the EU in this path. So I think that Egypt has a foreign policy which is very balanced with all of them. We have worked on combating the illegal immigration, which was an organized crime in Libya, and this is benefiting the Italians and the French. And then we were fighting terrorism, and this is benefiting the French and the Italians also. So we are a major player for both countries who are contradictory, have contradictory problems inside Europe about the same problem. So I think this is an excellent planning in diplomacy, that we have played a fair play, and now we're presenting a very clear option to everyone. Let's make a cleanup for the terrorists there, and let's find a solution. It will be good for everyone, for the Italians and the French. Maybe they will have peace together when we will find a solution in Libya. But let's not forget that there are an external intervention that was there in Libya from Turkey and Qatar, and I think that Egypt was clear about it from the beginning. we will have another problem. We have a solution for it, which is reconstruction. We have our friends in the Emirates who are interested in it. So I think that Egypt's foreign policy is very clear, very balanced, even though those we are talking to have contradictions between them, but still we have the clear option, and it's fighting terrorism, fighting illegal immigration, bringing stability. About Khalifa Haftar, about Saif al-Islam al-Qaddafi, about Sarraj, this will be left to the people of Libya and the international community, which will lead the path to elections.
Yes. Dr. Abdul Halim, now, when we're talking about a balanced Egyptian diplomacy, now, whenever we talk about regional crises, certain countries always seem to pop up. We see Russia being involved in many crises. They have a say. We also see Turkey also involved in certain crises, and we have a balanced diplomacy with all these countries. However, some of these countries have contradictions among themselves, including, for instance, right now there's contradictions between the US and Russia, for instance. How do you see the Egyptian diplomacy balancing all these connections, all these relations with these different countries, and still trying not to get involved in these contradictions? Do you think some of these countries would actually hold some sort of a grudge or have bad feelings towards Egypt being supporting countries that contradict their own interests?
Right. As a matter of fact, our own presidential authority actually has nothing to do with all these, disputing, entities, I would say. Our contradictory parts, I would really represent. One major fundamental fact that we are working towards the process of achieving stability and dignity and respectability as well for almost, all our own citizens and almost for all the Egyptian population. On the grounding that, first, actually, the process of selecting peaceful ways of solving materialistic problems and diplomatic issues to a greater extent. That's why, we are there in Syria. We are doing our own vital sort of role, actually, in Libya. In much the same way that we are contributing every now and again, actually, to Yemen, particularly after the sudden departure of the previous late Ali Abdullah Saleh, I would say. But until the very moment of speaking, actually, we don't have any sort of very much straightforward and direct enforcing upon the selection and rejection of the people of their own final ultimate choices, I would say. We're playing the sort of the game of the deal of resourcefulness on a distance, apart, without straightforwardly interfering. But every now and again, we're doing a large number of maneuvers, actually. We're training, United Arab Emirates soldiers, in much the same way that, as much as His Own Excellency, Mr. President Fattah Sisi, said his own very much famous, axiomatic word, which is just the distance, actually. We are not being part and parcel of the internal disputes, but in much the same way that we are doing our own, sort of tributes and role by safeguarding the borderlines as much as training the other people. No matter how all these international forces may be very much contradictory to each other, the fact remains that we are doing our own sole main interest in our own Egyptian daily life, that is, safeguarding the people, protecting their own, sense of peace of mind, as much as their own daily materialistic ends. This is very much exemplified by the very much strategic step that you have had since a couple of years ago in the comprehensive operation Sinai 2018 in the middle and the northern part of it, actually, despite the fact that a large number of, political analysts would insist that it's a sort of infringement upon the international Camp David treaty, I would say. But the fact remains that, regions A, B, and C are very much involved until today under the protection and interference of the Egyptian armed forces without the least rejection on the part of the Jewish troops or the international forces or the peacekeeping forces, actually, because there isn't any sort of hidden agenda. We're doing our own best to safeguard as much as to secure the interests of our own citizens, minimal amount of peace of peace of mind as much as peaceful living. In addition to one main fundamental issue, which is, the very much successful summit of the European, Arabian, in Sharm el-Sheikh, that would come out at the end of the day, when the sort of the confrontation between His Own Excellency Mr. Sisi and the Romanian president, when you would address him straightforwardly, sending him, one direct message as much as to the whole world at large, that is, leave us to do our own peaceful means of living, as much as we can really do in the light of our own interests and in the interests of our own community, actually. And he would insist every now and again, actually, in sending one of the major and straightforward messages that between the East and West, there should be some slight difference, actually. We have got our own cultural background, our own way of dealing with each other. When I would touch on, the sort of the attempt of some European countries, actually, to try to put an end for the capital punishment, actually. So, he would insist on representing to the world community at large that we have got our own notions and we have got our own victims in much the same way that there is a large number of martyrs whose families would ask every now and again for revenge and avenging their own deaths. But we are far from being a barbarian society.
Yes.
We are very much democratic to a greater extent. We have got our own legal code. And as such, the only lawful and legal way, actually, of sending all those criminal figures, actually, to their own final destination is through, a certain democratic legal prosecution, actually, to have its own final verdict, actually, at the end of the day. That's why even one of the most, interesting examples, actually, that he did, quotes, which is the territory of Sharm el-Sheikh. Very much charming, very much beneficial, actually. And he said that, suppose that all of a sudden, actually, one of those devastating bombs would, bombard the sort of the setting in which we are talking to each other at the moment, actually. What would you say, actually, about the terrorism and extremism and our own? So that's why we have got our own very much definite philosophy that is very much based on, first, sovereignty of the Egyptian territories, being very much far away from those contradictory and opposing parties. We have got our own final destination and our own interest in our own people in much the same way that we have got a large number of ethical values and moral details and very much democratic lessons that should be addressed in the interests of our own people, that would not contradict your own point of view at large, no matter how your own views may be, actually.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the summit that took place last week in Sharm el-Sheikh was the first of its kind. It was a signal of Egypt really strengthening its relationships with the European community and as well the African community that has been high on the agenda for the last couple of years. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said recently that European Union is Egypt's #1 trade partner. The president further stressed the importance of increasing the European investments in Egypt in the coming period. The head of state made the remarks during a meeting with the president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, on the sidelines of the first Arab League European Union summit held at the Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. For his part, Juncker hailed the European Union's strong relations with Egypt, saying the European bloc is keen on going ahead with boosting cooperation ties with Egypt at all levels. He further praised efforts exerted by Egypt under President el-Sisi to achieve economic development and fight terrorism and illegal migration. He added the European Union will continue to coordinate with Egypt regarding regional and international issues in light of Egypt's presidency of the AU. The two sides also discussed the latest developments of the Libyan and Syrian crises and stressed the importance of maintaining Arab-European coordination to overcome common challenges. With the election of Donald Trump as U.S. president, better relations have been witnessed between Egypt and the U.S. To that end, Sisi and Trump have had a number of productive meetings and phone calls that have resulted in common stances and agreements over a number of bilateral, regional and international issues. Meanwhile, the bond between Egypt and Russia from 2013 onward has become increasingly warmer. The close relationship between the Sisi and Russian President Vladimir Putin has grown out of events of the Arab Spring and the chaos of the Brotherhood terrorist regime. Several arms deals worth billions of dollars have also been signed between Russia and Egypt during President Sisi's presidency, including the purchase of 50 MiG-29 fighter jets. Putin made his second visit to Cairo since Sisi came to power. During his visit, Putin signed a deal to provide Egypt with 4 Russian nuclear reactors worth $25 billion with a loan from Moscow for $20 billion.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Amir, now we've seen Egypt really strengthening its relations with the biggest entities, the international entities, the European community, the European Union, China, Asia, and the African Union as well, presiding over it this year. But a lot of political analysts are actually looking at what Egypt is doing, and they're saying, well, Egypt is very much shaping its political relations and the strategies of its political file and foreign affairs file according to its own economic interests, going through its own economic reform program, cutting deals and signing agreements with different countries individually and different entities in general as well. Do you believe that Egypt is really basing a lot of its foreign affairs on the economic interests and the economic challenges it is facing, or is there still a lot of political interest that Egypt is using as a reason to shape its future?
Well, if we are working according to our economic plan, why not? That's logic. But we have our own specificity also as Egyptians. In Egypt, we are Africans and Arabs and Mediterranean country. So we have to work on all these levels. And adding to that, we are in the heart of the storm, in the eye of the storm, as we say. We have a very terrible, unfortunately, neighborhood, wars everywhere, terrorism everywhere. So I wish we had only economic problems, but we have other kind of problems. But let me say that we are shaping our foreign policy on the actual mindset of the leadership. We have 3 levels of attitude. We were firm, peaceful, and mediating. We were firm in Libya when we hit the camps, terrorist camps, because we refuse, and we do the same thing in Sinai, that our sovereignty and security will be threatened like that. We were peaceful with the Ethiopians when we said no way that we will hurt our brothers. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi he's the first Egyptian president to use this term, brotherhood between the African countries. And we have seen a long way of negotiations and diplomacies with several governments in Ethiopia. And we are achieving good results now. And then we are mediating in Syria when we said we have to preserve the sovereignty of Syria. So let's bring this conflict to an end and then let the people decide. And we're doing the same thing in Yemen. So I can't see anything that shows that we are only working on the economic level. We're all working for the peace in this region. And I said it before, when President Macron of France was asked about arms given to Egypt, I said, we got the Rafale and we got all these arms. They know that Egypt is the stability of this region. We never made any outside aggression. We will never do it. We have our own military doctrine, which is stability. So we are working also on peace and diplomacy. And let me add something very important, is that about foreign policy in our time reflects the personality and the charisma of the president of the country. And let me make this comparison. We have seen lately the Turkish President Erdogan. He made comments about Egypt's the sentence of execution against the bloody terrorists who killed the prosecutor, General Prosecutor Hisham Barakat. And he made comments against Egypt. Our response was balanced. We ignored it. We don't want to exchange war of words. We are busy about our own business and construction. And this is how the world are seeing now Egypt as a rock of stability. We know very well that there's intimidations, that there are countries who do not wish to see Egypt working on the economic, cultural, because it's important to gain it as a soft power, as we say, and the military geopolitical power. We are working on these three bases. And President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is a very, very patient leader in all these problems. We were in 2013 banned from the African Union. We had very tough relations with some European countries. We didn't say, well, let us mind with our own business and then send our foreign minister, Sameh Shukri. No, President Sisi went by himself to Berlin, Paris. He made eye-to-eye contacts with all these presidents, and he said that we want peace and stability. You have to respect our choices in Egypt. And we came to this point now in Sharm el-Sheikh. This is the result. No one was expecting that Donald Tusk of the EU, the head of the EU, and other head of states in Europe will come to this conference. In 2013, no one imagined that Egypt will host in 6 years such conference.
Yes. Well, you mentioned Turkey and Qatar. Now, Egypt made its position known regarding these two countries, along with the Arab Quartet. Now, do you see a change in position or attitude or dynamics between the rest of the international community towards these countries? Do you see these countries actually changing their attitude?
Well, it's as I said, it's the action and the reaction. It's the action. Look at the action of Turkey towards the problem of refugees. It was blackmail, blackmailing the EU with millions of euros. If you won't hand us the money now, we will let all the refugees, including terrorists, go into your borders. And it was a real threat for the EU. They will never forget it. They will never forget they were blackmailed, they were threatened, and their own, let's say, ally in NATO betrayed them at a certain time. And now he's shifting all the cards to the enemy of, or the adversary of the EU, which and the West, which is Russia. So he made all the choices where went wrong at the end, that he has bad relations with all his neighborhood now. So I think that now everyone understands who is leading Turkey and who is leading Egypt. And we have seen why the president will make such comments about country, a sovereign country like Egypt in jurisdictional sentences. Doesn't he have the same problems in his country concerning the press even? So I think that we kept quiet and his actions are talking. About Qatar, it's different because Qatar is an economic interest for several countries. Yesterday, the foreign minister of Qatar, he was in Moscow. So Qatar is trying to find a rescue boat anyway in the West or in Russia. But at the end, I think that Qatar now understands that Egypt is very tough. It won't be that easy, that the things they imagined in 2011. So let me say that diplomacy in Egypt is balanced in a way that we will ignore all these kinds of threats. By their own actions, they will be condemned.
Yes. Dr. Adel Halim, now, during last week's summit, the Arab-European summit, still the issue of the Palestinian file, the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations came up, and many countries have said that no, they still believe in a two-state solution with East Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital. And quite recently, the Palestinian president said, well, it's not going anywhere, and they don't really see the US administration being a sponsor of the peace negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's an ongoing issue for many, many years. How do you see the balanced Egyptian diplomacy acting towards this file, along with the international community and countries, obviously, such as the US administration? How would they deal with this file?
Perhaps the sole loud and very much forceful one indeed during the previous period of the declaration of Donald Trump of Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel was only the Egyptian voice, actually, even now and again. And I think that Egypt did play such a pivotal role since quite a long period of time, since 1948. It did never ever forsake the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, fortifying the Palestinian cause, insisting every now and again on the international resolutions, actually, of UN. That is the withdrawal of the Jewish troops to the borderlines of, of the 1st of June 1967. And in the meantime, demanding every now and again on the rights of the refugees to be returned again, as much as the stoppage of the process of expanding and building settlements, in much the same way that, they are asking every now and again the international community, actually, with such a very much forceful and loud voice, to let the Palestinians have their own say about their own self-determination outside. But I think that the problem is very much a bit from bad to worse, particularly when the American administration is very much, concentrating the zoom of the camera on three parties. That is Garrett Kushner, with his own very much Jewish orientation, David Friedman, with his own very much imperialistic point of view. In much same way that, there is what you might call the US envoy to the Palestinian territory. All these three figures would propagate each single individual day that the Western Bank is part and parcel of the Jewish state, at the time that it isn't, and at the time that all the Arab community, including all the voices in the Arab League, would insist on the liberation and on the insistence of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the sole voice and the sole agency actually to be dealt with. Here lies one main fundamental problem, which is the Egyptian intelligence, as much as the Egyptian diplomacy, would play such a very much forceful role, which is trying to settle and sort out the internal problems and to bring together, the sort of the scattered areas and parts of the house from within. I would really say that in more than one respect, His Own Excellency Mr. Fattah Sisi would send Samah Shukri, foreign minister, just by way of bringing the tussles of both Fatah Hamas, of trying to communicate them every now and again, and to let them sit on a negotiation table, actually, just by way of unifying themselves first, in such a way as to give a very clear and very much exemplary lesson for the whole community at large, that we are unified from within. And any sort of internal disputes among those people should be classified to a greater extent in such a way as to give a very much glaring example of how unity is to be part and parcel of their own internal schematic agenda. One major fundamental fact that, the Egyptian diplomacy would play, particularly within the Palestinian, because I'm going to finish just in a couple of seconds, which is, back again, actually, to Oslo, that did stop since actually 25 years, and trying to revitalize and reinvigorate it again at the eyes of the world community at large outside.
So you think that Egypt should be the country actually taking the initiative in trying to break this deadlock?
Well, I mean, it's a role that has been initiated since quite a long period of time, and I think, would be in the near future as
definitely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, obviously Egypt is facing many regional challenges. That is part of the big incentive of Egypt really shaping its foreign policy. Still a lot of work needs to be done, and definitely our government is working on achieving it. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. Mohammed Abdul Halim, the political analyst. I'd also like to thank very much Dr. Cherif Amir, the professor of geopolitical affairs at Paris University. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on NILE International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.